It should be clear by now I've done a lot of serious thinking on crowkind, and yes, that also includes how they came about. Their uniquely insidious nature demands explanation, and the fact I don't deal with them on a daily basis has meant I can tolerate dwelling on their wicked-winged existence a little from time to time. And though I'm certain they must come from the depths of the underworld, it's not so easy to picture exactly how this happened, since I've never been there to snoop around, and hopefully won't slip down the wrong manhole and get the chance. I just know that the underworld is even below the darkest drains, and is where all the very worst things happen, like crows. At least that's what my mother explained. Flappers don't live underground, though, and so I could never quite get my head around how the crows came from down there in a practical sense. But I was eventually able to start putting together a theory of crows after discovering a key clue. High in a pavement tree one day, one of the biggest on these blocks, I managed to get an amazing view, seeing much further than usual round here, right through a gap in the buildings to distant territories. And so I kept climbing even higher still, thinking maybe I might just catch a glimpse of the end of the world. Well, unfortunately I ran out of steady branches for that, but what I did catch sight of was the hazy gray form of an incredibly tall chimney, smoking somewhere on the edge of town, even taller than a building. Because there was no roof in sight and it was too big for any roofs anyway, I realized the chimney was probably emerging from the ground, and with the size of the thing it might go way down under the surface. In other words, the smoke could actually be venting from the underworld itself, the way steam vents up from the sewers sometimes. This towering chimney, which is just a big pipe in the end, could be the entry point for crows. I figured how they flew up to the surface from the underworld. I finally found it. But that still didn't explain how they got down there in the first place, did it? Well, this is where some bird-watching experience helps you out in life, combined with some properly focused philosophy, naturally. Everyone knows birds like to nest in trees, but a keen birder will know that some actually try to build nests in chimney chutes. Sounds dumb at first, but if some hindwalkers kept cutting down your trees, or even just pruning them too short, what are you going to do? Build your nest on some window ledge so they can fry your unhatched kids for breakfast? The other thing you need to know here is bird anatomy. If you've studied it like I have, sucking on even the smallest bones, you'll know that crow skeletons look very similar to all the perching bird types about the place, except pigeons. Underneath, they're all related somehow, having shared the same nests in the beginning or something. But as we know, it just went terribly wrong with crows along the way, which I'm in the process of explaining, of course. So now, with our nesting and anatomical knowledge, we have the key philosophical ingredients we need to put all this together. Let's say a flock of those perching birds, ones that didn't look too different from crows in the bone, lost their nesting trees one season. Maybe the hindwalkers cut most down to make chairs, because their legs don't fold properly to sit. And they cut the rest down to carve walking sticks, instead of learning how to walk properly on four paws so they don't topple on the most basic prowl as soon as their head fur turns snowy. That one always gets me, by the way. At the point where you're needing 3 pegs to get around, you might want to admit four-leggers were right all along and just join the team. Anyway, the nesting trees were chopped to pieces and all the other trees around were nested up. So these flappers flew over to the towering chimney and searched inside to see if they could nest in there until some spare trees grew back. After all, it was tall and thin like a hollow trunk, but bigger by far, with plenty of room for even the largest flock going round. Inside, the walls were caked with soot, forming all these useful ledges to build upon. And that chute wasn't smoking at the time, so it looked safe enough, right? In fact, maybe it was even safer than a proper tree, being much harder for bandits to climb up or swoop through. And so the flock flew down there, carved out some basins from the soot chunks, stuffed in some tufts of bark beast fur and strands from tossed tatty hindwalker hides. The eggs were laid, sat on for a while, and some little flappers began to hatch.
Heartwarming little bird tale there so far.
But Gloomtown had other ideas, and so did the underworld below it. Everyone in the flock thought their chicks would grow up in a smokeless chimney. But then it started up, like the rooftop stumps in winter, and those flapper parents realized they picked the wrong trunk to raise a family.
But the chicks weren't old enough to flap their way out, and so their parents kept braving the fumes to feed them.
And all this time the soot and smoke were soaking into the baby birds like mud water into a tossed chunk of bread. Their feathers soon turned black as coal, and their bright beaks and legs turned smoke gray.
The flapper parents were terrified at what their chicks had become and abandoned them there in the chimney, thinking maybe they were just bad eggs. In a sense, they were right, but they could never have imagined just how deeply and eternally rotten those birds would ultimately become.
How did the young flappers survive now without being fed then? There were unhatched eggs, as there always are. Just ask the hindwalkers, who steal more than anyone. These blackened smoked eggs in the coal-carved nests were now all devoured by their hatched relatives. But when the eggs were finished, the true treachery began, the true horrors, and a sign of what was to come from these fallen flappers. Now the larger chicks turned on their head-bobbing brothers and sisters, and there, in the dark sifting fumes, pecked these siblings to death against the soot-caked walls before greedily devouring them.
And so the chimney chicks grew, with relatives for their feed, being more soaked with murk by day and night, right through their feathercoats into their very beings. Eventually they ran out of siblings to gorge and had to leave their own nests to raid others. But like all baby flappers, They were too young to master the airways and fell straight from their nests or crashed into the inner walls and came falling after. But as we know, this wasn't a normal trunk their parents had so recklessly hatched them in, and it wasn't even a normal chimney either, where if a falling fledgling is lucky, he might drop straight into a lounge room in time to peck from a leftover platter.
Down that dark, smoking chute the flappers fell, deep down into the very underworld itself.
What happened there we can't truly say, but it can't have been good, can it? And it's down there these birds likely learned their most insidious ways yet. And when this was done, and they were fully feathered and finally resembling the merkbirds we now see, they were desperate to burst free and spread through the upper world. While they were away, though, the smoking chimney was only clogged further by soot, and as this corrupted flock flew up together, aimed at the circle of morning sky above, to begin their first day of deceit, they jammed in the chute, each clogged bird clogging it further.
And now inside that chimney writhed a slap-flapping mass of merkbirds, wedged tight and submerged in soot like worms in the darkest soil. As smoke rose, it mortared them with even more residue, and it looked like there was no way out now. They were stuck like a fur ball in the throat, licked from a coat rolled over road tar, but with nobody to cough them out.
This is where the real tragedy happened, though.
In desperation, the trapped flappers prayed up to the circle of sky above, pleading for their gods to save them. The bird gods hesitated, knowing where these chimney chicks had been, what they had become. But in the end, bird loyalties won out, I'm afraid. And so one tragic day the bird gods fanned a great black cloud overhead.
Caw, came the prayers of the trapped flappers, the once sweet voices of their kind now hoarse from smoke and resonating in a great chorus from that towering tube like a blaring bagpipe of the hindwalkers. Then the bird gods pecked the clouds and incredible rains poured out, loosening and washing the clogged soot away, down into the underworld.
Caw came more prayers.
And gusting winds from the bird gods' mighty flaps shook even more soot free. Caw, the birds pleaded once more. And a thunder boom rocked the towering chimney to its stone bones and removed the final clogs.
Horrifically, the trapped birds were loosened enough to flap their wings and fly free, spilling out like muck water from a pipe. And now the flock perched on the massive chimney rim side by side as the rains poured down, these blackened, twisted creatures extending their drizzling wings for the first time in the dim morning skies.
But though the rains had washed the loose soot away, nothing could wash it from deep within their feathers, beaks, and leg scales. And it couldn't wash the hell from their souls. These were the first silhouettes of crows ever to taint a skyline, and they tried to chirp and sing, but their voices had been permanently poisoned from the smoke and only raucous raspy caws emerged no matter what they had to say, tormenting the ear holes of all living creatures.
And when they spied the world from their high chimney perch, they saw no living thing that looked or sounded like them. They flew down to nearby rooftops to investigate further. But when they called out to passing flappers, nobody recognized them, and either fled from the disturbing sight or mobbed them in terror. They were even shunned by the very perching birds they'd originated from. And so these soot-stained flappers realized they now belonged to no flock alive but their own. They were a new breed of bird with their own insidious society and abandoned many normal bird customs, like perching timidly and knowing their place in a chase. But you can see that after that whole experience of being rejected by their parents, devouring their own siblings, being buried alive in soot, not to mention being shunned and mobbed by all flapper kind, and obviously growing up in hell too, the crows were consumed with incredible rage and jealousy and assorted sinister intentions.
They had become completely crooked, diabolically demented, and they vowed to harass and sabotage wherever they went, and carry out a reign of cawing terror over every park and town of this world. They became the murky scourge, the crows we know and loathe today.
And the biggest shame, obviously, is that we wouldn't have any of these problems if that damn storm hadn't arrived, if the cat gods had managed to thwart the meddling gods of the flappers. The first crows would have been buried forever in that chimney, starved and dried like the corpses I've seen stuck in regular roof chutes, bones sticking out of their husky hides. I don't know why the cat gods didn't interfere and leap up at those bird gods before they managed to fan the clouds over. Perhaps the bird gods are more powerful than we think. Surely they're not as powerful as cat gods, but maybe it's like with pigeons or crows or even ducks, where there are just these enormous flocks of them and that's how they get an edge. Or perhaps the cat gods were simply caught napping. Even though they're divine, we have to remember they're still cats in the end.
There's an even more obscure idea I've considered. Maybe the cat gods actually wanted crows to emerge from that cursed chimney of the underworld, to keep cats on their toes and toe claws shooting out. It's not out of the question. But anyway, this is all just me philosophizing again. The origin of the murky scourge is frankly quite murky. And the reason any gods would allow them to exist, cat, flapper, bark beast, or even hindwalker gods, even just one of those cawing crooks on the furthest tree in all existence, clasping a branch hung over the very edge of the world, is a bigger mystery still.